I woke up to the sound of a heart monitor and a voice I didn't recognize telling me I was lucky to be alive. My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 31 years old, and 11 days before I opened my eyes in that hospital bed, I was driving home from a late shift at the marketing firm where I'd worked for 6 years, when a delivery truck ran a red light on Route 9 and hit my car broadside. I don't remember the crash. I remember leaving the office, and then I remember white ceiling tiles and a nurse named Priya adjusting a tube in my arm. 11 days. A shattered pelvis, 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and a coma they'd only just started easing me out of. My mother was sitting in the corner chair when I woke up, scrolling on her phone. She looked up, startled, and said, "Oh, thank God," in a tone that sounded more relieved about something else than about me. I didn't think about that tone until later. At the time, I was just trying to remember how to swallow water. 3 days after I woke up, still barely able to sit upright, still on a morphine drip, my phone buzzed on the little rolling table beside my bed. It was a fraud alert from my bank. Ally Bank, savings account ending in 4471. The account I'd been building since I was 22 years old. $84,216, saved one paycheck at a time for a down payment on a house I hadn't found yet. The alert said, "A withdrawal of $3,000 was made from your account. If this was not you, please contact us immediately." $3,000, while I was unconscious in an ICU bed. I remember staring at that notification for a long time before I understood what it meant. My hands were shaking, and not from the accident. I asked my mother, still sitting in that corner chair, if she knew anything about it. She didn't even look up from her phone right away. When she did, her face did something I'd never seen before, a flicker gone almost as fast as it appeared. Then she smiled and said, "Don't worry about that right now, sweetheart. Focus on getting better." That's the moment I should have known. But I didn't, not yet. Quick question before we go further, where are you watching this from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know who's here with me for this one. Because what I found out over the following weeks wasn't just about $3,000. It was about $84,000. It was about 2 people I trusted more than anyone else in the world. And it started with a phone call from my bank 3 weeks later, asking me a single question that changed everything. To understand how this happened, you need to understand who I was before all this. I grew up in Millbrook, a small town about 40 minutes outside Columbus, Ohio, the middle child of Diane and Gerald Whitfield. My older brother Adam was 34. My younger sister Lily was 26. My father worked as a regional sales manager for an industrial supply company for almost 30 years. My mother stayed home when we were young, then went back to work part-time at a dentist's office once Lily started school. We weren't rich. We weren't poor either. Middle class, careful with money, the kind of household where you didn't waste food and you definitely didn't waste money. I started saving seriously at 22, the year I got my first real job. I lived frugally, a studio apartment, a used Honda Civic, brown bag lunches, because I wanted to buy a house before I turned 35. I wanted a yard. I wanted something that was mine. By the time of the accident, I had $84,216 sitting in that Ally Bank savings account. I told my parents about it at Thanksgiving, proudly, the way you tell your parents things you're proud of. My mother had said, "That's wonderful, honey," and my father had made a joke about me buying a house before he ever managed to pay off the mortgage on theirs. Here's the detail that matters. 2 years earlier, I'd added my mother as a joint signer on the account. It wasn't reckless, it was practical. I traveled for work sometimes, and I wanted someone who could handle things if I was somewhere without signal for a few days. My mother, not my father. I trusted her judgment more, if I'm honest. She'd always been the more careful one. I never imagined I'd need to think twice about that decision. My brother Adam was a different story. Adam had always struggled, not with anything illegal, just with consistency. He'd started 3 different businesses in the past 6 years. A food truck, an online sneaker resale operation, and most recently, a small home renovation company he ran with 2 friends from high school. Each one had folded within 18 months. Each time, my parents had helped him get back on his feet quietly without ever making a big deal of it in front of me or Lily. I didn't know, at the time of my accident, how much that quiet help had actually cost. I didn't know Adam's renovation company owed a supplier in Cincinnati $41,000 for materials that had already been used on 3 job sites. Job sites Adam had been paid for, but the payments had gone somewhere else. I didn't know he was 2 months from a lawsuit. I didn't know my father had already told him there was no more money to give. I didn't know any of that while I was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. I found it out one piece at a time, over the following 2 months, the way you find out anything that someone worked very hard to keep you from finding out. 4 days after I woke up, still in the ICU but stable enough to have a real conversation, I asked my mother again about the $3,000 withdrawal. This time she had an answer ready. "It was for your father," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed, holding my hand in that particular way she does when she wants a conversation to feel gentle instead of serious. "He had some chest pain the week after your accident. We were terrified, Claire. We thought with everything happening with you, we thought something was wrong with his heart too. We took him to Riverside for tests. The insurance didn't cover all of it up front. I used your account because it was the only money we had quick access to. I'm sorry. I should have asked you first, but you were in a coma, honey. There wasn't exactly a good time. It was a good story. It had specific details: Riverside Medical Center, chest pain, insurance gaps. It had fear in it and love and the kind of parental instinct that's hard to argue with when you're lying in a hospital bed yourself. I believed her. I actually apologized to her for asking. I want to be honest with you about that because I think it's important. I wasn't a fool. I wasn't naive. I was someone who loved her mother and had no reason in that moment to think she was lying to my face while holding my hand. I told her it was fine. I told her family comes first, and $3,000 for a health scare was nothing compared to my dad being okay. I didn't ask a single follow-up question. Not what the test results showed. Not which cardiologist he saw. Not why they hadn't just used their own emergency fund, which I knew because we'd talked about it once, sat around $12,000. That question would come 3 weeks later, not from me, from my bank. I was discharged from the hospital 19 days after the accident and moved into my parents' house temporarily since I couldn't manage stairs or cook for myself yet with my pelvis still healing. It made sense. It felt honestly like a gift being taken care of, having my mother bring me tea every morning, having my old childhood bedroom back for a few weeks. I didn't check my Ally account balance during that time. I want to be honest about that too. I wasn't monitoring it closely. I was on pain medication, doing physical therapy twice a week, trying to relearn how to walk without wincing. Checking my savings account balance was not high on my list of priorities. On day 26, I got a call. Not a text alert this time, an actual phone call from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Ally Bank's fraud prevention department. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Monica, from Account Security. She said they were following up on a pattern of activity on my account and wanted to confirm a few recent transactions with me directly. I said okay, thinking this was about the $3,000 withdrawal my mother had already explained. Monica said, "I have 6 transactions here over the past 3 weeks, totaling $61,400. Can you confirm these were authorized?" I remember the exact way the room went quiet around me. Not because it got quiet, my mother's TV was still on downstairs, but because everything in my own head stopped. 6 transactions? I said. I only know about one for $3,000. There was a pause on Monica's end. Then she said the sentence that changed the entire trajectory of the following 4 months of my life. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something. Is Diane Whitfield authorized to make withdrawals on this account without your independent confirmation?" That was the question, not dramatic, not accusatory. Just a bank employee doing her job, verifying account activity, asking a simple procedural question that split my life into a before and an after. Because yes, technically, legally, my mother was authorized. She was a joint signer. She could withdraw money without my permission because I'd given her that access 2 years earlier for exactly this kind of emergency. But no one had told me there'd been 5 more withdrawals after the first one. $3,000, then $8,000, then $15,000, then $12,400, then $9,000, then $14,000. $61,400 gone from my account, while I was recovering in the very house where the person taking it was making me tea every morning. I asked Monica to send me a full transaction history and hung up the phone with my hands shaking so badly I could barely set it down. I didn't go downstairs right away. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed for almost 20 minutes, staring at the wall, trying to construct some version of events where this made sense. Maybe there'd been more medical bills. Maybe my dad's heart scare had turned into something bigger. Maybe there was an explanation that didn't require me to believe my mother had lied to my face and kept lying week after week while I recovered under her roof. I went downstairs. My mother was in the kitchen. I asked her as calmly as I could manage why there had been 6 withdrawals instead of 1. Her face changed instantly. Not into panic, into something more practiced, like she'd rehearsed this moment without knowing exactly when it would arrive. I was going to tell you everything once you were stronger, she said. I didn't want to stress you out during recovery. Tell me what, Mom? She sat down at the kitchen table and told me finally about my father's actual medical situation. It wasn't a heart scare. It was a hospital bill from an ER visit unrelated to any chest pain, a kidney stone, as it turned out, that had cost about $4,000 after insurance. That accounted for the first 2 withdrawals, more or less. The other $50,000, she said, had gone to Adam. His business partners were threatening legal action, she said. He was going to lose everything, his house, maybe worse. Your father and I didn't have it. We didn't know what else to do. I asked her why she hadn't told me, why she hadn't called me, texted me, waited until I could actually understand what was happening and give real consent, instead of using a legal loophole from a hospital bed. She said the sentence I think about more than almost anything else from that entire year. You were unconscious, Claire. You weren't using the money. Adam needed it right then. I want you to sit with that sentence the way I had to sit with it. You weren't using the money. As if my savings account was a spare umbrella in a hallway closet. As if 11 years of frugal living, of skipped vacations and packed lunches and a car I drove until it had 190,000 miles on it, was just sitting there, waiting to be repurposed the moment I stopped being able to object. I asked where my father was. She said he was at Adam's, helping him sort things out. I called my father. He didn't pick up. I want to pause here and tell you something I only understood in hindsight once I had the full picture. My mother's explanation, upsetting as it was, still wasn't the whole truth. It was layer 1. There would be more. That night, unable to sleep, I did something I'm not proud of but don't regret. I went into my mother's home office, a small room off the kitchen where she kept bills and paperwork, and I found the folder where she kept bank correspondence. Inside, I found something that didn't fit the story she'd told me. A printed email dated 8 weeks before my accident from my father to Adam with the subject line, Ray, talk to your mother, we can help, but one more time only. 8 weeks before my accident, not after. This wasn't a sudden emergency response to a crisis that happened to coincide with my hospitalization. My parents had already agreed to bail Adam out again before I was ever hurt. They just hadn't had the cash on hand to do it, until I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to ask questions, with $84,000 sitting in an account my mother could legally access. I read that email 4 times. Each time, the timeline rearranged itself a little more painfully in my head. They hadn't panicked and made a desperate choice in a moment of crisis. They had a plan already in motion, and my accident had simply handed them the opportunity and the access to execute it. I put the folder back exactly where I found it. I didn't confront my mother that night. I needed to understand more before I said anything else, because I was starting to realize this wasn't really about one bad decision made under pressure. It was something that had been building for a long time, and I'd walked into the middle of it while unconscious. The next morning, I called my bank back and requested something specific. The full documentation on the joint account authorization, including the original date I'd added my mother, and this is the detail that would matter most. Whether there had been any changes made to that authorization recently. Monica told me she'd have to escalate that request to a specialist and would call me back within 48 hours. Those 48 hours were the longest of my life up to that point. I had no idea they'd end with a second, much bigger shock. The bank's specialist, a man named Robert Chen, called me on day 29. He confirmed what I'd requested, and then he told me something that made my stomach drop in a completely different way than the withdrawal amounts had. 11 days before my accident, a form had been submitted to Ally Bank requesting an increase in my mother's withdrawal authority on the joint account. Specifically, removing the daily transaction cap that had previously limited any single withdrawal to $2,000 without additional verification. The form had my signature on it. I told Robert that was impossible. I had never signed anything like that. I hadn't even known such a form existed. He said the bank would need to open a formal signature verification review, and that in the meantime, they were freezing all further activity on the account pending investigation. I sat with that information for a long time, 11 days before my accident. Not after. Someone had submitted a form forging my signature to unlock the exact level of access my mother would use just days later. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in a moment of parental panic. This was planned. Someone had prepared the account quietly in advance for exactly the kind of large withdrawals that followed. I thought about who would have known the details of my account well enough to fill out that form. Who would have known my account number, my mother's role as joint signer, the specific daily cap that needed removing. There were only 3 people who'd ever discussed my finances with me in any detail. My mother, my father, and because I'd once helped him with a spreadsheet for one of his failed businesses, my brother Adam. I requested a copy of the actual form from the bank. When it arrived by encrypted email 2 days later, I stared at the signature at the bottom for a long time. It was close. Close enough that a bank clerk processing hundreds of forms a week wouldn't look twice. But it wasn't mine. My real signature has a small looping flourish on the C in Claire that I've done the same way since high school. This signature didn't have it. Whoever forged it had studied my handwriting, but not closely enough. If you've ever had a family member cross a line like this, I want to know, how did you find out and what did you do first? Tell me in the comments, because what I did next is not what I expected from myself. I didn't go to my parents first. I went to Adam. I drove to his apartment, my pelvis still aching with every pothole, and knocked on his door unannounced. He looked surprised to see me standing there, still moving carefully, still weeks away from being fully healed. I didn't ease into it. I told him about the forged form. I watched his face while I said it, the way you watch someone's face when you already suspect the answer but need to see it confirmed in real time. He didn't deny it well. That's the kindest way I can put it. He started with, "I don't know what you're talking about." But his eyes went somewhere else in the room, and his hands found something to do, picking up his phone, setting it back down, and within about 90 seconds the story fell apart. Adam admitted he'd filled out the form. He said my mother had asked him to, that she didn't feel confident matching my signature convincingly, and he'd always been good at art in school, good with his hands, and she'd asked him to just help make it look right because it was for the family anyway, and Claire would understand once she knew everything. I asked him if he understood what he just described. Forgery on a legal financial document, timed specifically so that the higher withdrawal limit would already be in place before I was hospitalized, which meant, and I said this to him directly, that on some level they were prepared to act the moment an opportunity arose, hospitalization or otherwise. He got defensive then. He told me I didn't understand the pressure he was under, the lawsuit, the supplier threatening to go to the county for fraud charges against his business, the fact that if he didn't pay the $41,000 he owed within another 6 weeks, he could be looking at actual criminal exposure, not just a lost business. I asked him why none of that had been my problem to solve. Why, if the family needed to make a hard decision about helping him, that decision hadn't included me, a full, functioning adult with a say in what happened to money I had spent 11 years saving. He didn't have an answer for that. He just said quietly, "Mom said you'd say no." That was, in its own strange way, the most honest thing anyone had said to me in the entire ordeal, not that they'd asked and I'd refused. That they'd assumed I would refuse and decided my refusal didn't matter enough to ask. I confronted my parents together 3 days later in their kitchen with a folder of my own. The bank documents, the forged authorization form, a printout of the email I'd found, and a timeline I'd built out by hand on a legal pad, minute by minute, date by date. My father tried at first to reframe the entire thing as a misunderstanding. We were going to pay it back. We always intended to make it right. You make it sound so calculated when really we were just trying to survive a crisis. My mother mostly stayed quiet, which told me more than anything she could have said. I laid out the actual sequence for them, out loud, because I needed to hear myself say it as much as I needed them to hear it. 8 weeks before my accident, they'd already agreed to help Adam again. 11 days before my accident, they'd forged my signature to remove the withdrawal cap on my account. The accident happened. While I was unconscious and unable to object, they withdrew $61,400, not for an emergency they'd stumbled into, but for a plan they'd already set in motion, one that simply required me to be unavailable long enough to execute it. And then, once I woke up, they lied to me directly to my face more than once, a chest pain story, a we didn't know what else to do story, none of which accounted for the 11-day head start or the forged form. My mother finally spoke. She said something I'll never forget, not because it was cruel, but because it was so devastatingly honest about how she actually saw the situation. "You've always been the stable one, Claire. We knew you'd be okay eventually. Adam wasn't going to be okay." I asked her if she understood what she just admitted, that in a moment where I genuinely could have died, where I was fighting for my life in an ICU, her calculation wasn't about my well-being at all. It was a resource allocation decision. I was a stable asset. Adam was a liability that needed managing, and my account was simply the most convenient tool available to manage it. She didn't have a response to that. Neither did my father. I left that night and didn't go back to their house. I moved in with my friend Renata for the next 6 weeks, still healing, now carrying a different kind of wound entirely. I want to be clear about something. This next part wasn't fast and it wasn't clean. If you're expecting a triumphant, instant reckoning, that's not what real life gives you, and it's not what happened here. I filed a formal fraud dispute with Ally Bank, submitting the forged authorization form as evidence, along with a written statement from Adam, which I got him to give reluctantly, after telling him it was the only thing that might keep me from pursuing this further against him personally. He signed a statement confirming he'd completed the form at my mother's request, using a signature that was not authentic. The bank's investigation took 11 weeks. During that time, they restored access to $14,000 of the missing funds relatively quickly, the amount tied to the 2 most recent transactions, which fell more cleanly within their standard fraud reversal window. The rest was more complicated because the funds had already been transferred out and spent, some to the supplier in Cincinnati, some to legal fees Adam had incurred trying to settle his dispute quietly. I also spoke with a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Ostrander, who specialized in financial fraud between family members, apparently common enough to be its own specialty, which was both comforting and deeply unsettling to learn. She explained my options clearly. I could pursue criminal forgery charges against my mother and brother, which would likely succeed given the documentation, but would almost certainly end my relationship with my entire family permanently and could result in real legal consequences for both of them, including possible jail time for my mother given the amount involved. Or I could pursue a civil route, a structured repayment agreement, notarized, enforceable, but without criminal charges attached. I sat with that decision for almost 3 weeks. I won't pretend it was easy, or that I didn't spend several of those weeks wanting to choose the criminal route out of sheer anger. In the end, I chose the civil path. Not because I forgave them, I want to be honest, forgiveness took much longer, and in some ways is still a work in progress, but because I decided I didn't want the rest of my life defined by the worst thing my family had done to me. I wanted accountability, not annihilation. We signed a notarized repayment agreement. My parents and Adam, jointly and separately liable, repaying the full $61,400 over 4 years, with the account frozen from any further joint access, my mother permanently removed as a signer, and monthly payments going directly into a new account only I controlled. I'm not going to tell you this story ended with some big, cinematic apology scene, because it didn't. My mother did apologize eventually, in a conversation about 4 months after the confrontation in her kitchen. A real apology, not a "we were just trying to survive" justification, but an actual acknowledgement that she'd chosen Adam over me in a moment where I couldn't even speak up for myself. It mattered. It didn't erase anything, but it mattered. My father's apology took longer and was smaller, and I've made peace with the fact that it might always be smaller than what I actually needed from him. Adam and I are still rebuilding something. He makes his payments on time, every single month without fail, which I notice even if I don't always say so. We talk maybe once a month now, careful, a little formal, like 2 people relearning a language they used to speak fluently. I bought a house 11 months after the accident, not with the money that was taken, since most of that was still being repaid at the time, But with a smaller down payment, I rebuilt through a combination of savings, a small inheritance from my grandmother that I'd never touched, and yes, the first several installments of the repayment agreement. It's not the house I imagined when I was 22, brown bagging my lunches and driving a Civic with too many miles on it. It's smaller. It took longer. But it's mine, and no one can access it without my knowledge ever again. I think about that ICU room sometimes, the version of me lying there, unable to speak, unable to object, trusting completely that the people around me would protect what I couldn't protect myself. I think about how easy it was for that trust to be used against me, not by a stranger, not by someone with bad intentions from the start, but by people who loved me and also, somehow, decided in a moment of pressure that I mattered less than someone else's crisis. I don't think my mother is a villain. I think she's someone who made a series of choices under pressure that she'd probably take back if she could, except for the fact that taking them back was never really an option once the withdrawals were made. I think Adam is someone who's spent his whole life being rescued and never quite learned what it costs the people doing the rescuing. But understanding why someone did something isn't the same as pretending it didn't happen. I learned that the hard way, in a hospital bed, and then again in a kitchen, and then again in a lawyer's office signing papers that made official what I already knew in my chest. That love and trust are not the same thing, and sometimes the people who love you most are still capable of deciding, quietly, that your unconsciousness is an opportunity rather than a responsibility. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from this, it's not don't trust your family. I don't actually believe that, and I don't think that's the lesson here. It's this. Love someone fully and still protect the things that took you years to build. Those two things aren't in conflict with each other, even though it might feel that way. I removed my mother from that account not because I stopped loving her, but because I finally understood that loving someone and giving them unlimited access to your life are two very different acts. And confusing them is how people like me end up finding out what happened to 11 years of savings through a phone call from a stranger named Monica, asking a simple question I never thought I'd need to answer. I still see my parents. We still have dinner sometimes, careful and imperfect. I don't know if we'll ever fully go back to what we were before, and honestly, I've made peace with the idea that maybe we shouldn't. What we have now is smaller, but it's honest, and it's mine to define in a way the old version of our relationship never quite was. That's where I've landed, not at some perfect ending, just at something quieter and something true. This story is a work of fiction, created for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is coincidental. If this story resonated with you, consider it a reminder. Protect what you build, even from the people you love most, because trust without boundaries isn't trust. It's just an open door.